A minister who everywhere he went doubled the number of parishioners. He'd been up in Andover, he'd built a house up there, he knew Bullfinch. I mean, he's an amazing man. I think he had high blood pressure by the looks. He died a little younger than he should have, but I'm guessing that he just didn't have the right medicine. Now, there you see him, and that's a portrait that belongs to the college, and we were able to get a portrait of his wife that goes with it. And he was an extraordinary man. In a very short space of time, he raised enough money to build Griffin Hall and to get a professorship. A professorship then, I guess you could get for about $3,000 or $4,000. Now it's, what, over $1 million. Just a little bit of difference in there. Well, anyway, he goes and he builds Griffin. And he changes its location. It was originally going to be located over somewhere in the East Quad. He says, no, it's got to be right by the road. It's got to be parallel to the road. It's got to have a golden dome. It's got to stand out. And it was called the Brick Church. That was its name until the 50s. And you see it in its location there. And you see how, with the building of that, then the idea of just building on the two eminences gets a little bit disturbed, but he wanted it to really show off. The next, please. And we see it there in its original state. It had two simple doors that led in. This led into the chapel, which was in here. Chapel, a two-story chapel, with a balcony. And the other one led into the classrooms. It was essentially a classroom building. It was also the place where the Williamstown National Bank hung out in the early 20th century. It had a lot of functions. It got changed when that doorway was added on in 1908, and they closed up the other two. I had the experience in 1934 driving through Williamstown with a white-haired genius called Frank Lloyd Wright. And he looked out the window at this building and he said, "Who put that damn door on that quite nice building?" And I thought, wow, he is more sensitive to this than Mr. Perry was, Perry, Shaw, and Hepburn, who designed Baxter Hall, whom we caught out in front of this building sketching that doorway. The doorway was 1908. So Perry was getting off to a sort of a shaky start on his planning for this. Well, this is a wonderful building, and let's look at the next two, please. It comes out of Asher Benjamin. Asher Benjamin was a Connecticut master builder, how-to-do-it guy. And he wrote books and illustrated them, different types of buildings. And this Asher Benjamin design is the wonderful church up in Old Bennington. And this is obviously this is Asher Benjamin's design for a meeting house. Well, if you look at the section right here into this, this is what we have here in the faculty room, but not the faculty room the way it is in this picture. I forgot to go take a picture of it the way it is now. They've taken the bookcases out that were put in 1904 and made it look relatively more like it did in 1828 when it was built. But all the details of the tower, every single detail is just exactly taken right out of an Asher Benjamin sketch book. This one happens to be 1810. The next, please. We jump on to the idea of our astronomer, and we built this wonderful building in 1837, which you see in its original location. Its original location is because the students went and got a whole lot of rocks from Pownell and dropped them here. And that created where it was built. Because then it got moved. It got moved this way and then this way. And you see it in its final resting place. But this is a wonderful building. It's the use of a octagon with wings, and the octagon has a drum over it, and that becomes a motive that we'll see in other buildings. Now, the next slide shows that that had been done before, namely in the building on the left, 1842, was also octagonal. That was something to do with astronomy, and it was over about where Driscoll is. And it was used in 1905 as a dormitory. I don't know quite how many people. But I put that slide, the octagon, up beside this slide, which is an outhouse designed by Thomas Jefferson, because he had built his first home was an octagon. So when he built his outhouse, it was octagonal. He was a consistent man. The next, please. Now, those same shapes, you see, get into the design for our first architect-designed building, namely Lawrence Hall, now the Williams College Museum of Art. And you can see it is an octagon. There's the plan of it. These original plans are in the Brown Library, along with a lot of other information about the architect named Thomas Tefft, T-E-F-F-T, a very important architect who died in his 30s, a great tragedy. Wonderful architect. Now, this is a really very modern library, because what it consists of is you put the librarian in the middle, and he looks into these alcoves, and he can keep people from cutting out pictures, which was one of the main problems of early libraries, evidently. And it's a first in that it was paid for by Amos Lawrence. I'll show a picture of him in a minute, who was one of the founders of Lawrence and Lowell and all those. They all lived on Louisburg Square, but they owned all those manufacturing sites. And he gave $8,000 for that building. He also gave $6,000 to found Lawrence College out in Wisconsin. Wonderful to think you could start a college with $6,000, but he did. The next, please. There you see him, as painted by Thomas Harding. There are two pictures of him, one in the Portrait Gallery in Washington. That's a copy by Harding of this picture that is in the College Art Museum. Now, it's a wonderful structure. That shows it to you as it was in the library, which of course, after the completion of Stetson Library in 1924, then of course it was no longer a library. But it could house, Mark Hopkins figured this out, it could house up to 35,000 copies. And Mark Hopkins, who was behind this, and a great buddy of Amos Lawrence, and a great buddy of the librarian at Brown, they figured between the four of them, or was the three of them, that would be big enough. That was all we needed to run Williams College, forever, 35,000. I wouldn't be surprised if we buy that many a year. Now, I don't know. But anyway, it's a wonderful kind of Greek revival building. It's more Greek than anything else on the inside, and it's now been put back to its, as near as possible to its original. It has a lot of the paintings that belong to the college in it. It's used for receptions, and they thought that they better save the paintings from getting any food or on them, so they put glass over it. So now you can't see anything but yourself. I've been trying now for 2 years to get the glass off the paintings. I'd rather go and pay for an extra guard when they have an opening. I said I would have. Take the damn glass off. Okay, but they're overprotected, you see. The next, please. Now, this is the way the campus looked and the way the town looked in the middle of the 19th century. You had east, you had south, and you had Lawrence. And you had a Spring Street filled with Greek Revival houses, and you have another painting. These pictures were given to college by a graduate of Williams in 48 or 7. And it's a fascinating picture because it shows all kinds of things. It shows, of course, Griffin is there. And if you look carefully, I don't know whether you can see that, and I'm not sure I can from here. It's got a spire down here. Well, that was a Greek Revival church that became a kind of, well, where we voted, it was a vaudeville stage. And I wanted to save it, but it was torn down. I wanted to get it moved to Weston Field, because it would be the only opera house that ever appeared on any campus athletic facility. And it could have been used for receptions, and it could have had decent Johns built around it. I mean, aren't we getting beyond the stage of those Johns? Bud Dodge, class of 24, gave those if he could be the first to use them. Now I think another generation's come along. We ought to start all over again and build a nice structure there. Well, that's neither here nor there. There's a factory in here. It was mostly farming, cheese, and terrific 60,000 sheep in the valley, in the middle. So notice here that the fields go way up higher than they do now. And of course, Spring Street was little houses. But this gives you, and that's the view the other way. And incidentally, down at the end, you'll see the Congo Church. And that Congo Church was an early 19th century church, and it's right out of Asher Benjamin. The next, please. I show you this because I'll end up with this building. This is a new chapel to replace the brick church, Goodrich. And there you see it in all its original splendor with its spire. The spire is now gone. This is a man named Gervais Wheeler. We're beginning to get name architects now. We had Teft for Lawrence. And he works in Gothic, and this is a lovely little Gothic, and there you see the interior of it. And it remained the chapel until 1904, when the Thompson Memorial was built. Okay, the next, please. We'll come back to that. Gothic. Then we had, in the second half of the 19th century, we had a lot of wonderful horrors. And some of them have been preserved. You'd be surprised what that one is. Anybody got any idea? It exists today. Dodd House. I heard it from somebody. That's Dodd House. That's Dodd House when it was Swisser. but it had more chalet in it. Now, this is 81 and is the Field Observatory. And you see, we're getting into specialized stuff. This is Italian, North Italian Renaissance revival. Not Tuscan, not Roman, North Italian. And it is made entirely out of cast iron. Everything you see there is cast iron. All the capitals, absolutely everything is cast iron. The problem was, it was out near the golf course. They tore it down for, why the hell didn't it just get left? I mean, you know, wasn't bothering anybody. It didn't work because it rattled. They couldn't make any calculations. If the wind was blowing, it made too much noise. So, and if you can imagine casting, all these Corinthian type capitals and pilasters were cast in forms out of cast iron. In other words, we're flexing our technological muscles, but maybe not our sense. Okay, the next. Then you have, of course, the center core. Once you have built the chapel in 1857 and used this local dolomite stone from up in Pownell, then when you hire the brothers, what's their name? Well, anyway.
Katie.
Huh?
Josiah Katie.
Yeah, well, anyway, I didn't hear what he said. When they did the gym in 86. Now, the gym built in 86 was built about 3 years before basketball was invented. So, as you see it on the right, this is before 1938 when they raised the roof of it, or 28 it was. And so we won all our games because our team knew where those posts were. Now, you had then Morgan Hall, which is sort of Jacobean. It's Jacobean and Elizabethan kind of together. And if you look carefully as you go down Spring Street, there's a little Chinese note in it. There's a Chinese hat that comes out over one of the things. But it's a wonderful four-square, rugged building, and so is the gym, 82 and 86. The trouble was, of course, that it was built a little early, and therefore the basketball court was a problem. Not for us, but for the opponents. All right, the next, please. Now, at the end of the century, the main building is, of course, Hopkins. And a guy named Allen, who had been designing a lot of the buildings, was here, obviously, working in the framework of Henry Hobson Richardson. The problem is Richardson had died. In other words, it wasn't done by Richardson. So it's Richardsonian, which is different than being Richardson. And it's got too many different colors. I've always argued that it's sort of a Richardson building that's been put in a four-way vise and kind of squeezed together. And maybe has too many different things. But I don't think you can probably see that. I certainly can't. But this is a plan of the whole town, I mean a bird's eye view, before this was built. And you can see the buildings along Main Street, and then you come down and there's a big void where this building was to go. We found a plan in 1931 of a new Cram and Ferguson a new layout for the campus. And they had said, we will move that building around the corner behind the chapel. Now, did they know what they were saying? That's solid rock. That would have been a hell of an operation. Thank God they didn't do it. It's now got an addition to it, and it looks very well, as I'll point out. The next, please. Have I got that upside down, haven't I? No. Well, it's all right. I'm going to want to change it anyway, so. Turn of the century, Williams College didn't necessarily know it had happened. In other words, there was no Sullivan around, or no Frank Lloyd Wright, or anybody like that. So when we built the chapel in 1904, it was the usual idea of a young architect, in this case named Collins, who owned a lot of books, or had access to a lot of books, sort of adding up things from here and there, mostly from a church in Wells, not the cathedral, another church in Wells. And I've always thought it almost would work better if the tower would lie down and the church would stand up. Not quite. It really isn't as good a building as the one across the street, Goodrich. But there it is. It looks great. Christmas time, Christmas carols, candlelight, when you can't see it. The next, please. Then we got Imperial. There must have been, architects were hired by the trustees. There was no input from anybody but at this point. We got Cram and Ferguson. They were famous Boston architects. They could give you either Gothic Revival as the Naval Academy, or Georgian, big Georgian. And they, of course, did the planning here. The interesting thing of the first slide, it shows you Williams, which was 1913-14, the same time as Chapin, but, wait a minute, Williams, yeah. Sage built in the 20s, but with the same design, just flopped over. You see, the tennis courts were there. So here you see the whole thing, and there you see it just with Williams. Kind of a little pompous in a way. It's trying very hard. It's being not the kind of simple West College Griffin, but big columns. And the four Tufts people who painted jumbo on the columns some years ago, and they caught them because they caught them with empty cans of paint. Their families had to spend $40,000 sandblasting the front of Chapin. So it was basically a kind of no-no operation. The next, please. Now, what we built in the sort of, we built this in '38. It's been added to, and it looks better with the addition. It's a kind of squashed Monticello. And that was designed by a New York firm. And then here we've got the Perry Shaw and Hepburn Baxter Hall of '54, which has had lots of different uses. But has never really solved anything really very completely. It's kind of sort of a stranded piece on a flat plane. It's sort of, in a way, kind of postmodern. That's almost the best thing you can say about it. The next, please. There's a long story involved in that, but now, in the late 30s into the early 40s, there was a woman who wandered around the campus here with a big ear trumpet, and Finney was yelling into it. And there have been lots and lots of reports of this. One is, I would like to give the college a museum. She is yelling at Finney. Finney yelling back, we have one. And then, I would like to give an administration building. And Finney points to Hopkins and said, we have one, in the ear trumpet. So there was nothing private about this conversation. All you had to do was open your window and you could go around. Well, at any rate, she finally settled on a theater. And they got, Cram and Ferguson made a try at it, and it was turned down because he repeated Chapin Hall, which he had built in 1913, for the nave of the thing, and then he put a tower on the end, but he didn't have any way to get down into the pit, which was sort of difficult. He flew up, lapped a rope over and to get it down in the pit. Well, anyway, they finally got people from Yale Drama School, and they kind of worked out a modern building, which you see on the left. This is after it had been pared down by some of us kind of working hard to try to get a decent building. And that had a meaning to it, that you went up in blocks. This is to this, this is to this. Well, during the summer, we left thinking that was what was going to be built. We came home and found on the right. And they put stripes all over it. Stripes making the tall woman look short. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You add up the stripes. But the inside of it is completely modern. It's a totally schizophrenic building with the outside saying practically nothing about the inside. But there it is. It's a very workable theater. And the Williams Summer Theater loves it. The next, please. That was 41. Incidentally, built at a cost of $300,000. Athletics got left behind in a lot of this, and took some time to get going. The hockey rink was a wonderful instance of building first a rink, like you see here, artificial ice, but the coal pile was over here. So if there was a southwest wind, southeast wind, the coal dust got on the ice, and all of a sudden you looked at the game and everybody was flat on their flances. And they had to blow a whistle, sharpen everybody's skates, clean off the ice, start up again. Well, after you'd gone and watched that happen 2 or 3 times, you became somewhat bored. But it finally got a cover on it. It got a